My name is Hansson. I'm professor of biomedical ethics at Uppsala University. I'm leading a research center for research ethics and bioethics, the Center for Research Ethics and Bioethics at Uppsala University. We have been working for 20 years on different issues around ethical and legal and social implications of life science research mainly, but we do other kinds of research as well. We have been during the years working quite extensively in different European joint projects, primarily in the field of biomedicine and life science and health. So based on this, I have been making a lot of experiences related to the running of and the collaboration in different kinds of research infrastructures. And I would like to share with you now some of these experiences. I can say also that I'm director in the interim period now for the Common Service ELSI, that is a part of the BBMRI ERIC joint European research infrastructure on biobanking and biomolecular resources. I'm also a coordinator of a new IMI project. IMI stands for Innovative Medicines Initiative. It's a joint collaboration between 33 partners representing both industry, pharmaceutical industry, and also academic institutions and universities. Okay, so I will start first with providing you with an example on a collaborative project that we were taking part in, and this was a collaboration in a rare disease. This disease is called juvenile dermatomyositis. It affects children, it's a skin disorder. It's rare, and that implies that there are not sufficient number of patients in each country, not even if you count all the clinical centers in each country working with this disease. They don't have patients enough in order to perform a clinical trial or a research project. So in this case, they needed to participate across borders. In order to collect data of 130 patients, they needed participation of 30 countries. And this was international, this was not only Europe. And also the participation of 103 clinical centers. The problem that they experienced in setting up and working across borders with this project was that everything went fine, smoothly, regarding the science, the clinical centers. Everyone was willing to share, to get access to data. But of course, for such a project, they also needed ethical approval by the appropriate ethical review committee. And that was needed in all 30 countries. And in some of these countries, like in Italy, you need an approval by each participating clinical center review board. So there are regional review boards in Italy that everyone has to have its say regarding participation. So the complaint by the researchers here was that this process of obtaining ethical approval took 2 years. And the gravity of this situation can be understood if you look into the fact that for many of these rare diseases, they affect children. There's not sufficient treatment. There is, in many cases, there's not even a diagnosis, but when there is a diagnosis, there is no treatment available. So patients are waiting for new research results, for new opportunities or improved treatment. I talked with a father of a child that was 5 years old. She was suffering from a rare disease, and the doctors had been giving them something around 5 years window. After that, she would most probably die of her disease. So this father was waiting, and if you then put that in this context where you have a process of obtaining ethical approval that take 2 years, this seems to be a waste of time, so we need better procedures. Interesting feature also this process was that in 97% of the cases, the ethics approval went just through without any comments, no questions from the ethical committees at all. In the remaining 3%, the approval was turned down, and the reason for that was that this clinical trial was not allowed to do for legal reasons. But regarding the ethics process, this took a long time. So now, how could this happen, and what is the background of this? What we have been trying to do in these research infrastructures, that where you really need to work across borders, is to identify the roadblocks, to make sure that this research infrastructure is actually going to perform what it's set out to do. Of course, we have common regulation in Europe. We have a personal data directive presently. However, it is interpreted differently in different nations. So there are different specific rules regarding, in this case, informed consent, possibility to do research, and so on. So there are different ethical review systems. In one country, it is sufficient to have a decision by one review board. In other countries, you might have multiple review boards that have to have a say. There are also different local regional cultures within countries. In Sweden, for example, where I am located, we have regional ethical review boards, and they are governed by law, but the law also gives a latitude of judgment for each review board. So different regional cultures grow and expand as well. So in some of these review boards, you can perfectly well have a project approved, but in another review board it's denied. Another problem is that if you go to the experts, in this case ethical and legal experts, they have diverging views on how things should go, how things should be regulated, and that is also, of course, a roadblock for collaboration across borders in large infrastructure, regardless of the subject or the field of interest. And there are, of course, different values that people in different countries look differently upon. So one of the elements that is often taken up in these fields where you use data, you use biobank samples, human biological samples, the concern by the legislators, by the ethical review board, is to protect privacy. And there's not one notion, not one view of privacy. And you could ask yourself, what do you consider as being most private? What is for you the most sensitive information that you wouldn't like to share with others? And when we ask this, we see that there are different views in different countries and cultures. How strong measures for data protection or rules regarding surveillance do you want? And if you talk with each other in this course, you will find out, probably, I think, that your views differ. The question then for running this kind of infrastructure across borders is to try to find a common ground regarding what is at stake. And in this case, what was at stake was privacy of the research participants, of the patients. And in order to find a common ground, we need first to see that this value of privacy is something important for all. It's a highly regarded value by all individuals. And there is a lot of evidence, a lot of historical records actually, where you can see that in all societies there is evidence of a commonsensical distinction between the public realm, which is open to the community, to the outer world, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the private realm, where individuals, families, friends, couples enjoy a sense of immunity to the outer world, so they can decide and try to keep a private sphere for themselves where they have access, and then play different roles in the outer world that is publicly accessible. If we look into the implications and of this commonsensical notion, we still see that there are variations between cultures depending on ideologies, economical means in different countries. But there are three common features. If you look into the different countries, you will find these three elements, and this is coming from a large volume, 5 volumes on A History of Private Life by Arias and Duby, that you can find of interest. And the first common feature is that there is an interest of all individuals to enjoy a realm of seclusion, somewhere where you can decide to keep the outer world outside. And this relates both to information about yourself and also geographically, your private sphere in terms of your location and the possibility of others to see what you are doing. The other common feature is that everyone wants to have a say about where we draw the boundaries between the private and the public spheres. To have a possibility to decide that this part of my life is private, but this part of my life I can share with others. So everyone wants to enjoy this realm of seclusion, but also have a say where we draw the lines. The third common feature is that if I shipped you out in the Atlantic, way out, and placed you on a desert island, you would be private. There would be no one that could see what or hear what you were doing, so you would be entirely in your own private sphere. But that would not be the kind of privacy that you like, that you want. You want to enjoy your privacy within a community, within a society, to participate with others, to maybe also enjoy and reap the fruits of collaboration in a society. So you need to balance the interest of being private with the possibility to collaborate with others in a community, in a society. If you go then and look into research projects or research infrastructures, and now I will take an example from the area of health. We need to set priorities sometimes regarding this line between enjoying the private sphere and participating with others. The common say among doctors and in healthcare is that the patient is my primary concern. But when we look into what patients want, we see that they have multiple interests that needs to be balanced. So they have interest as in this case, regarding biobanks and data, they have interest as sample donors. They have donated the tissue. They have donated data through the medical records, through registries, through surveys. They want to determine themselves on the use. They want to be sure that their privacy is protected. They want maybe to exclude unauthorized persons from use of this data. So that is one set of interests. So we can call them the autonomy or privacy interest. But if we legislate and if we form regulations and rules around the use of data and samples only based on this interest, we will lose. At the other end, we will lose out in terms of other important interests that pertains to the role and the interest of individuals to participate in society. So interest of patients at the end of the research process is related to the possibility of a new treatment, to improve treatment, to get access to new medical products, to new knowledge. These are general research interests. In many of these projects that are running into biomedicine and life sciences, there are long lead times before you really have a new product. But the patients have then general research interest. They might benefit in the future, or they depend on others having participated before, and that they in turn can reap the fruits of that. So then you can check your standards for, say, informed consent, for access to research results, access to data and samples against these standards. Do you acknowledge both of these two interests? In setting up the balance, we, in the field of health research, we set up different information and consent procedures. And in doing this, we have in different kinds of collaborations experienced several roadblocks and obstacles. One is that if two groups want to participate and collaborate in a joint research project, it must be based on the informed consent by the patient. And if the informed consent does not allow this kind of collaboration is not possible or hampered. I can give you an example of that in a research infrastructure that we were working with, and this was in rheumatology. So they were setting up a large collaboration project in Europe. And in this case, there was a group of samples and data that were registered by one of the participants. And they had, in the information and consent procedure and in the informed consent, stated that they were going to do research on inherited mechanisms and cellular biological substances. And when they formulated that, I think the idea was that to make it broad enough so that you could do different kinds of research without having to go back and get a renewed consent from the patient. The problem for this was that when this group wanted to collaborate with a private company in order to explore their findings and into something that is more related to new drugs, the company immediately saw this clause in the informed consent and asked themselves and asked the group, does this really allow us to do genetic studies with whole genome sequencing on these samples? And since that was not clear, they had to go back and ask for a reconsent. If you want to ask for a reconsent, and in some countries, like in Italy, that is the tradition to do that, and in some regional boards in Sweden as well, you want to go back, you are asked by the review committee to go back or have a reconsent. And the background is that you have asked for consent for a specific purpose, for a specific project. And then you collect your data and you collect your samples, and then later on you realize that as science progresses, you can use the same samples and the same data for another purpose. So if the ethics review board then say that this new purpose is not covered by the original purpose, you need to go back. And this is often about what many ethical review boards are requiring. However, if you now take this practice of reconsenting and compare it with the two interests that the patients had at the beginning and at the end of the research line, you can see that there is a loss here as well. Of course, if you go back and ask for reconsent, there is a respect for autonomy, maybe respect for privacy, but there is a cost to it as well. Everyone knows that if you need to go back and ask for a renewed consent, you will not get 100% response rate. People will not answer because they are not willing, but for other logistical reasons. Regardless of how efficient you are in writing new information and requests to patients, you will never get at most 60 to 70% response rate. This means that if you go back and ask for reconsent, the scientific value of the study you are setting up decreases. Instead of using 100% of the samples and the data, you can only use 70%. You have no possibility to check what are the dropouts and how could you handle that in the scientific statistical calculation. So this means that the scientific value of the study decreases, and that will lower the potential of providing new treatment and medical products. So when we explain this to patients and research participants, they often say that, well, maybe it is then too costly for me to exercise the right to informed consent in this very strict meaning, and maybe someone else, for example, the ethical review board, could make a balancing and decide that maybe this is a new project that doesn't raise any new risk, that doesn't raise any new balancing on benefits and risks, so it might be possible to go ahead without asking for a reconsent. So regarding research infrastructure, and this I think covers all fields, regardless if it's about life science, physics, climate change, or whatever, is that it's actually possible for you, regarding ethics at least, sometimes in law also, to get experts that have really diverging opinions, as I said, and you can have an expert that supports almost whatever. And this is a problem for this area of doing research ethics and bioethics, supporting different kinds of research projects, research consortia, and research infrastructure. So I said that I'm director of the Center for Research Ethics and Bioethics. It's a center, multidisciplinary center with 30 colleagues, junior and senior scientists working in different areas of research ethics and bioethics. Some of them are medical doctors, some are nurses, some are philosophers, some are social scientists, some are ethicists, and some are lawyers. So we work together, and in order to try to manage this situation where you had diverging opinions, the nature of ethics is that everyone is entitled to and should have a possibility to have an opinion on anything in ethics, and to be respected for that opinion and to be able to voice that opinion. But we get into difficulties if we have so many different views that come in and shall guide research infrastructures. So in order to attack that problem, our center decided early on that what we are going to provide in terms of advice, where we go into, for example, the nature of informed consent, the possibility of access, how to handle and manage data in a safe way. We have the requirement on all the researchers that they need to publish their findings, their arguments in peer-reviewed international journals of good quality. And the reason for this is that by doing that, there is a kind of a check by peers. A peer is someone who is equal in expertise, in knowledge in a certain area. So if they can check what we are writing and doing, it is at least a little bit more evidence-based. So everything does not come out. So this is what we have been doing now for several decades, actually. And have quite a good publication record. And that was not only something that I'm saying, because we were evaluated 2 times by peers in association with the whole University of Uppsala, and this is what they said about us. So we were in 5 levels ranked among the top. That was world leading. And they said that regarding the quality of research, the publications of the group range among the top quality in the field. Several members of the group have been on national and international committees and societies. The panel considers the group to be of top quality. And I'm not saying this in order to bragging, but I say that it is important that we have some kind of quality check also in ethics, in similar regard as we have regarding science. What is also important is that if you shall work across countries' borders, you need to engage teams of ethical and legal and social experts in several countries. So there is something called the Common Service LC, or BBMRI ERIC, as I said, and that is the strength of that common service is that it is placed and represented in all member countries. At present, 19 member countries of BBMRI ERIC, 2 pending, so there are just 6 missing in the European Union. So in each of these countries there is an LC team, so that might be a bioethicist, it might be a lawyer, or there might be a person versed in and knowledgeable in the methodologies of doing social science research, for example doing large surveys. So we have in Italy a strong group working in that field, trying to place what BBMRI ERIC is doing as a research infrastructure within the context of society, bringing in societal concerns of the general public or different groups in the different nations participating. So if one wants to work across borders, one needs to have expertise in all these nations. And the reason for this is that it looks differently. Even if we now are replacing in the European Union the Data Protection Directive with a General Data Protection Regulation, that is a law, it is binding for the member countries, but it still will be implemented in different ways in different countries. And the cultures regarding ethical review will look different in different countries. So in order to collaborate across borders, we need people that know what is the rule, what is the legislation in a local country. If I have a researcher asking me, coming from Sweden, and he or she wants to participate and collaborate with, in this example, samples or data, I have at least 5 different laws to have into regard, and I had different legislations and regulations also regarding the ethical framework for doing this kind of research. So we need people who are knowledgeable and can contribute to collaboration based on knowledge about these national regulatory frameworks and the culture. So I can give you one example how we are addressing this in the Common Service Health, and that is to set up a federated LC help desk. That is a help desk where individual consortia, research projects, researchers can ask questions, and it's an increasingly number of research projects where you really want to collaborate. I think that this is one of the major features of BBMRI ERIC, that scientists have realized that you need to collaborate across borders. You need to get larger samples. For rare diseases, as I told you, this is really pertinent because there are not enough patients available in each country. But also in other areas of biomedicine, where we work towards a more personalized medicine based on more specific genotypes and phenotypes of individuals, you also need to collaborate across borders for all the common diseases. So this is something expanding. And in doing that, we need to then remember that you have different regulatory frameworks to master. And that, I think, is one of the main challenges regarding research infrastructures in Europe. And this does not only apply to biomedicine and health. Another point that I would like to focus on is an experience that we learned within a joint project called IMI Prefer. IMI stands for Innovative Medicines Initiative. Prefer is related to elicitation of patient preferences in association with drug development. So this is a collaboration between 33 partners. Half of them are from private and half of them from public. So there are pharmaceutical industries worldwide. There are academic partners also worldwide. There are patient organizations. There are regulatory authorities. There are health and technology assessment bodies. So all these work together. And I must say that I have been around in academic world and in university for many years. But we have learned very much from doing research together with industry. Part of what we have learned is the need for transparent action points, timelines, and deliverables. In the academic world, it's sometimes so that the person gets funding for a research project and then sets on to do that, and then you ask the person how it proceeds. Is it working fine? And they say, oh, yes, it's working fine. I'm still reading. I have some problems now, but I will come back. And you don't really have any control of where you are going. and you don't, and this is particularly problematic in a situation where you have a large infrastructure, and what you do in one part of that infrastructure affects what can be done in other sectors of that infrastructure. So BBMRI ERIC could be a nice example. The common service IT, which is related to finding out the technological tools, the computer systems, the software, in order to connect different parts of the project so that samples and data could be used more widely across borders. That common service is very much dependent on the common service ELSI, who is going to provide access policies, information and consent procedures that could be used, the possibility to compare different information and consent procedures from different projects and different countries to see, are they matching each other? So if we don't do our job in the right time, we will cause delays for the entire infrastructure. So therefore, any infrastructure, I think that this is extremely important. This is what the industry is much better on setting up than we are by tradition in the academic world, and that is transparent action points. Who is going to do this? Who is going to deliver? When is it to be delivered? And then you have a follow-up on this and a management function that is really essential. Many of those large infrastructure projects, I would suggest, lack efficiency and don't really reach the goals because there is poor management. So you need to have management and make sure that, of course, people in the different groups, different researchers, do what they are expected to do with joy and interest, exploring, scientific curiosity, whatever are the incentives for doing research. At the same time, as you make them see that now you have to deliver in a certain time period, and that is extremely important. So that is what something, and I think that goes for any larger research project, but also, of course, research infrastructures. I could say a little bit about the IMI Prefer, because that is an interesting project for many reasons. It's about elicitation or use of patient preferences in benefit risk assessments. We have, for any new drug, there is a complex procedure, both within the pharmaceutical company producing the drug. They are running clinical trials. They have to fulfill regulations and requirements regarding clinical trials. When they finally submit a proposal to the regulatory agency, in this case the European Medicines Agency, they have to provide a lot of documentation on the benefits, the adverse reactions. And then the regulatory authority decides that yes, this can be approved, or here we need more information, and so on. The idea behind this project is that one should weigh in the balance, not only the benefit risk assessments, but also patient preferences. It might be the case that a subgroup of patients are actually willing to face and take larger risks of adverse reactions in order to reap a benefit, and some are not. It might be that a child and his or her parent have different views on what is important or what they prefer, and maybe this also could be reflected in the regulatory assessment and in the decision procedure. Patient preferences might also count, of course, when it comes to access of drugs and the decisions made by the Health and Technology Assessment Board and the payer organizations, where they make decisions about reimbursement and subsidizing drugs. So the idea here is to identify methodologies and then test them in clinical case studies. I will give you a little more detailed example of this IMI Prefer project, because it's interesting from a research infrastructure perspective, where you collaborate both across borders, across different disciplines, and across both private and public partners. So in this project we have academic partners, we have pharmaceutical industry, we have regulatory authorities, patient organizations, health and technology assessment board. So the task is to identify methodologies that are scientifically sound and proven, whereby you can elicit patient preferences along the whole drug life cycle, from the identification of unmet medical needs all the way down to decisions about reimbursement or subsidizing medical drugs for different populations. So we need, in order to do this and to be of real help for the regulatory decisions, so we need to have both a bottom-up and a top-down approach. So you need a bottom-up approach in order to identify the concerns, what matters to patients, how much it matters, and how the trade-offs are done and what they want to prioritize in, for example, regarding benefits and risk associated with the new drug coming up on the market. But in doing this, and the academic partners were very fast to identify different objects for systematic reviews. What is the literature saying here? What is the scientific basis on this question about preference elicitation methods? And that is good, and that is important, but at the same time we need to remember that the outcome of this project is not only a good publication in a good scientific journal. The outcome of this project is really directed towards providing regulatory authorities with recommendations that are practical, and also recommendations to industry so that they can use, so that one really can, in the decision making, take into account patient preferences, because that's the whole idea. So we need to combine the bottom-up approach with the top-down approach, where we would like to select the methodologies that are of practical use, to find out the criteria that we will do by testing in different clinical case studies. So we need scientific accuracy in these collaborations, but we want something that is relevant for also regulatory authorities. The preferred project is interesting also regarding governance. And I think governance structure is something really essential. And in this case, we have the different work packages responsible for different parts of the project. We have work package on methodologies. We have work packages identifying different clinical case studies. We have work packages in order to provide recommendations. So we have members of this work package forming a steering committee, but we also have a management board. The management of these projects are extremely important to get people to follow, to identify, adhere to action points and timelines and deliverables. And then we have a scientific advisory board, an ethics advisory board, and a stakeholder advisory groups, and they are three. So the patients, the regulators, and the health and technology assessment bodies, and they form a network. So this is a governance structure where you really include and think through, and it can be rather complicated, as you can see here. The task for this is to be specified tasks, subtasks, to provide each of these tasks with the appropriate people, to specify deliverables and milestones, to set up action points, include collaboration with the task members, to set up realistic but definitive timelines to monitor and follow up, and to identify and measure key performance indicators. And this is how it looks when you set up a governance structure. You need to understand how the different work packages relate to each other, and you need to make sure that each work package, each subtask, is actually delivering at the point that can be used by others. If you don't have this kind of planning in advance, one group will be waiting for the results from another group, and that will delay the whole process, and you will never come to an end and reach the goal. I would like to say something about the management of research projects and research infrastructures. In those large projects that I've been participating, there are always a lot of good talent, people are doing a lot of good job, individual researchers are very innovative, things are coming out of the projects, but when it runs into problems, and it often does that, there is a need of management. And where we have run into problems in some of these, it has been because we had a lack of agreement on basic values. And my guide and my advice to anyone setting up a research infrastructure, running in a research infrastructure, is that in order to prevent those misgivings and conflicts and disagreements that are devastating for the possibility to reach the goal and the results that we aim at, is to discuss on some basic values. Legality is one of them. You have to realize that there are certain legal premises, and they must be known by everyone. There are legal premises within the nations, and we expect the different participants from each country to know that, and to have access to know what are the legal premises for that country. Otherwise you can't work together. Veracity, there must be a possibility to be true and honest regarding what we say that we are doing, what we have done. We can't have a situation where someone is doing something and saying another thing. I think transparency is one of the most important values that one need to define. The example here of these basic values is from a large European network called InnoLife, where we identified those, and the idea was to identify them and discuss them so that one gets a common understanding of what one means. For example, with transparency, some of the projects that I've been participating in are quite often, and also large infrastructure, are quite often initiated by one or two creative, innovative individuals who get an idea, and this is what we should do, and then they engage others coming in and adding to that. It's extremely important that those initiating this are transparent, because if they are not transparent with how people are selected, how money is distributed, how responsibilities are distributed, how rewards are distributed, it will soon run into problems. So transparency is one of the key values to protect and to describe in all research infrastructures. But also freedom of opinion. We know that people, I think the academic life thrives on the possibility of having a different opinion. That is the freedom of expression in science. A scientist is someone of a different opinion always, and it must be a freedom of expressing that and also discussing that. However, we can't have discussions going on all the time. We need to make decisions. We need to be sometimes pragmatic. We need to give up and in terms of efficiency. So we need to have efficient procedures. And that is extremely important. And that relates particularly to the governance structure. You can put so many procedures in the governance structure so that the whole system really collapses and you don't get anything out of it. Democracy is an important value because any infrastructure needs collaboration of everyone. So everyone must be able to see his or her own place and role in the infrastructure and how they can get access to decisions, can influence decisions, can make proposals. All this must be done in a democratic way, and you can't have different people treated differently. And that is a problem it's a challenge sometimes, just because quite often these research projects and infrastructures are initiated by a small group of people, and they tend to keep the leadership of it, and when new people are coming in, they don't really feel included. and are not included, and that is a great problem for the sustainability of any research infrastructure. Access and sharing of data, of results, another problem. In those projects where we have been working with private and public partners, we have to accept that, for example, commercial companies, they have legitimate commercial interest. In those areas of life science and biomedicine we have been working with, it's of course so that a company needs to protect their intellectual property rights. However, academic partners have also intellectual rights, not intellectual property rights, but they would like to publish. They have originality concerns that they need to make sure to be respected. And sometimes they have intellectual property rights. So there must be a policy for access and sharing of data. This can sometimes be quite cumbersome. We have been working with private companies in one of these research projects. There was another IMI project. The negotiation between industry and academic partners took half a year. It was the lawyers of respective universities and companies that were negotiating. So this is a problem that has to be faced up front. Confidentiality and right to benefit from medical treatment is another concern in life science. Confidentiality that we are quite often managing and handling private data, privacy protected data, and that has to be done by everyone. You can't have a situation where one researcher is, as happened in a project in Sweden actually, one researcher was carrying sensitive patient data on his own personal computer, forgot the personal computer on the subway home to Stockholm, and then exposed it for unauthorized use. And that cannot happen. That is detrimental to trust, and it's a violation of these privacy rights. Equity, that everyone is treated in an efficient and equitable manner. So this is what we then finally produced. Challenges in setting up. We identified basic values in this is the inner life network. Autonomy, beneficence, integrity, equity. And then for different, this was in life science and biomedicine, so for different goals, we identified challenges, for example, related to regulatory, diversities, to different moral landscapes, insufficient knowledge bases, and then we identified solutions, monitoring of the regulatory world, guidance regarding how to manage different moral landscapes, systematic investigations in order to gain knowledge, and teaching training as part of that. And then, as you see from this, we set up different tasks, different responsibilities. So I think it's part of a good experience on my behalf that we were able to identify the challenges, but also address them, provide solutions, and also provide a table of responsibilities for the different partners in this. So that was my reflections on experience over some years of working with research infrastructures and research projects in Europe. Thank you very much.